Oh gosh, that's such a big question.
Sorry.
I wish there was a simple answer because, I mean, basically, there's not a lot you can do because you're excluded from those meetings, which is scandalous because the people who are being talked about aren't allowed to engage in those meetings. It's governments and it's recognized NGOs. Having said that, there's a lot that you can do, but you have to do it early because a lot of what goes on at COP is preceded by discussions by country delegations in Latin America and in Europe and so on, who are positioning themselves. And the key to that is ministers of health, because they are, they're the representatives who go to COP. So if you want to start trying to influence COP, you need to start engaging with your ministries. Now, that's difficult, but at least let them know that you are there and that there is an alternative view to what could be going on. So that's one thing. Second thing is noise, because making a noise about this event, because for many in the media and so on, they don't really know about this. It's so important in a way to many people's lives, but it's all been, even the press aren't really allowed to be there a lot of the time. So it's all very stage managed. So getting media interest and getting some stories in the media about this is going to be very important. And that's what I mean by noise. Both in working with media well ahead of time, but also in the few days that lead up, and having media interviews outside the building, that sort of thing, and so on. So I hope there will. That's what I call by the noise. It's a bit like climate activism. You can't necessarily get into the forum, but you can make these issues better known. Well, there couldn't be a starker difference, because the COP climate meeting, it embraces NGOs. Well, it can't keep them away anymore, but they listen to those voices, and other UN meetings are like that as well. They listen to the voices of NGOs. Huge contrast to the tobacco COP, where the voices of the affected people are shunted aside, and only a very limited range of NGOs, anti-tobacco NGOs, are allowed in. So two framework conventions, a framework convention on climate change, a framework convention on tobacco, very different way of operating. So the more people we can get to talk about COP before it happens, and the more people who can be in Panama at the same time having alternative events, that's going to help. Good question, because in fact, for the last 3 years, the UK has been one of the biggest donors to the FCTC Secretariat. That's the WHO Secretariat. So in theory, we could play a lot of influence, because if you're giving them money, you've got some influence. But strangely, the UK has not sort of it's been a bit nervous about exporting its success, and I don't really understand that. Partly it was because when we were in the European Union is a bloc within COP. So the European Union agrees a position, and so the UK took a kind of just one voice. But now we've left the European Union, in theory, we can make a lot of noise. And the way COP operates, you only need one or two countries to make a noise, and that really affects proceedings, because COP operates on what's called a consensus basis. They don't vote. So if a country objects to something, it might get dropped. But we've tried with our government to encourage them to be more active. And I've worked with UK politicians who are trying to get the UK to be more active, but they're still a little bit, they haven't seen this as one where they'll get brownie points, on the world stage. So this one, they tell people what the UK does, but there's not much more than that. So it's a great pity, because it would be the UK model is a good one to talk about. Well, it's wrong. You know, it's a lie, but it's an important narrative for people in tobacco control. And I think, I mean, it's obviously incorrect because tobacco companies didn't invent these products, not e-cigarettes. They invented other products. They weren't the first to bring them to market, and they're not the major manufacturers or retailers. They still only have about 10% of the market. So tobacco companies came late to e-cigarettes and were forced into it almost because of the economic imperative. You know, people switching. I think many people in tobacco control kind of honestly believe that this is a tobacco company plot. And that, I think, is a narrative which is easy to fall into because they've had many years of seeing the tobacco industry as evil, and the tobacco industry lied, and it did lie. And now when they see the tobacco industry interested in safer nicotine products, they think this is an extension of, you know, they're not going to addict people to cigarettes, but they're going to addict people to vaping. So it's very hard to break from that mentality. And very hard also for doctors and public health people who for years have known the damage from cigarettes to come to terms with the fact that these alternative, safer products are made by the same people. You know, that's a little bit of cognitive difficulty there, because how can you suddenly... the tobacco companies are not public health agencies, but what they're doing has a public health impact. And that's very difficult for people in tobacco control to come to terms with. Yeah, I think things would have been different if they'd have come out of the pharmaceutical, or if doctors had invented these things. It's a good job they didn't, because they'd be terribly boring, and they wouldn't have been taken off. You know, they take off because they're good products and smokers want to use them. But yeah, it could have been different, but it wouldn't have been as successful if it was led by Pharma or led by doctors. Globally,
Yeah.
because this is a very pernicious influence on perceptions of safer products. Mike Bloomberg is very much against tobacco harm reduction, or it's against safer nicotine products, and there are, you know, has a lot of money. You know, one of the richest people in the world's got lots of money to give away, and like many philanthropists, you know, he gives money to people who would do things that he likes to be done. It's not a direct chain of command necessarily. In some ways there is, but there's money for specific projects. So it's a very bad influence. And, you know, when, you know, you look at WHO, doesn't have much money. So if Bloomberg comes along, you know, not only tobacco control, but in other areas of WHO's work, well, you know, you take that money. But it does affect, you know, the strategy that Bloomberg funded organizations have. You know, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, for example, is just awful because they create myths about vaping and myths about kids, you know, and it doesn't help. And they do, you know, unfortunately sometimes have influence on governments. Sometimes governments see through that. But there's lots of money there pushing in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
It's because people can't yet break free from the nicotine linked with smoking, linked with addiction. You'd expect once you separate nicotine from the dirty delivery system, the cigarette, people would begin to see nicotine in a different way. And, you know, the evidence, of course, is it's much safer, but also probably less addictive. And it continues to be demonized. So Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and the American Heart Association and the Union and now they demonize smoking, but now they're demonizing nicotine. It's an innocuous drug. It's a very safe drug, and it's not much different from in terms of impact or attractiveness than, say, caffeine. And yet it's seen as the thing that's going to trap your kids, lure them into a life of misery. So these are common narratives, but it's inappropriately demonized and misunderstood, very misunderstood as a drug. Okay, so for the first time we're broadcasting live in Spanish, and that was a kind of strategic decision because we want to bring what we do to many other countries, and too much of this is in English, and having it simultaneously in Spanish is a good first move for us, and we know there's such a lot of good work being done and to be done in Spanish-speaking countries. I don't think we're going to move GFN because, as we say every year, in Warsaw, and that's partly for logistic and other reasons. It's so much easier to run it in one place every year. But another bit of the work I do, which is not GFN, we organize road shows and events in lots of different countries, in much smaller events and sometimes a little bit under the radar. So we're very keen on those sorts of events happening in other countries, but the home of the Global Forum on Nicotine is going to be here in Warsaw for a while to come. I think there's huge opportunity. I mean, there's also great dangers as well. In Mexico, legislation has changed, but as colleagues in Mexico say, well, that's kind of symbolic in some ways because, in many countries you'll still be able to buy these products. I mean, they're clear dangers because there may be people in Mexico who want to go into manufacturing nicotine products rather than other stimulants. There are lots of people in Mexico who are used to making drugs and so on. Brazil, there's a consultation and maybe things change, but I think it would be hugely impactful if a few countries in South America, Latin America, have a positive attitude towards safer nicotine products. I don't know what's happening in Uruguay. Bizarrely, at one stage, they legalized marijuana and banned e-cigarettes. I mean, that's rather how schizophrenic this can be. But I mean, key, I think, is that Spanish-speaking, Portuguese-speaking countries come on board with this big impact globally.